Am I a bad wife for resenting my husband as much as I do? My husband has struggled to be a good partner in a lot of different ways. He has diagnosed ADHD that he does not manage so successfully. This has affected our relationship in many ways over the years. 1. Saying hurtful things that affected trust between us. 2. Making promises he cannot keep, both big and small. 3. Overall lacking empathy and privileging his needs over my own. 4. A complete and utter inability to communicate. We were seeing a couples therapist last year when I got pregnant. The couples therapist specialized in ADHD. He and my husband both seemed to agree that managing my resentments were my individual problem. I was working on doing so but utterly falling apart. I felt like it was hard enough being pregnant with a stressful partner without scourging through past behaviors that made me feel wretched. It just felt like too much on my plate psychologically. So I told my husband, boyfriend at the time, that I just needed to be happy and move on, and I was getting on this train and he had to get on it with me and ensure his issues are managed by the time the baby arrived and will be good. At this point we were no longer seeing our completely unaffordable couples therapist. It's important to note that I did genuinely become indifferent to past indiscretions because they were avoidable/annoying, and I had enough on my plate without feeling dragged down by thoughtlessness I did not deserve. Several things then happened after this. 1. My husband was insistent on a family name for our child. I said I would go along with it, but that I wanted to discuss it further with my feelings because it's my child too and I didn't feel considered. He said he would. Every 4 weeks when I turned another month pregnant, I would get upset and say it's my baby too and I'm growing him. I want to be part of naming my child. We didn't have the discussion until I was 32 weeks pregnant, and only because I had a mental breakdown that my needs were being so ignored, and it was not a very fruitful one. My baby was named by my husband. I call him a variety of nicknames. My husband knew I was against the name. 2. After a decade of promising a proposal, commitment, etc., and failing to make right on it, I gave up on being married and stopped caring. He insisted we had to get married for the good of the family. We sparred over it and I said I felt like I had a gun to my head, and again, being pregnant alone was hard enough. He pushed and finally I just did it. We got married while I was a few months pregnant. He was happy. I felt pretty pushed and dead inside, but I hoped it would make him sweeter on me. 3. I had a traumatic birth where a lot went wrong, and in real time I was terrified that my baby was brain damaged or dying, or I could. The doctor had told my husband it would be a while and he could go home and nap. While I was alone, shit hit the fan and there was utter panic with about a dozen medical professionals in the room with me, all of them panicking. It ended with 2 of them hugging me, which was terrifying because I was a little too shell-shocked to compute what had happened, but it felt like they were shaken up. This incident repeated a second time and I had a 6-minute splash and C-section by the time my husband was back. It felt like he and I were trauma bonded from all that happened. For like 6 hours. Later that night, he went home to sleep, overstaying in the hospital room, but we agreed he'd be back by 6 a.m. He fell asleep, didn't pick up about a dozen phone calls, and returned at 10 a.m. It was an accident, but it was an incredibly traumatic day for me, and the first night postpartum was an extension of that, where I felt totally alone and abandoned. 4. I did not receive the help I needed postpartum. My husband was terrified of SIDS, so he did the night shift, aka watched movies and played video games all night while watching the baby on the monitor and being present for the every 3-hour feedings that I also was obviously there for. Since we had a baby that slept well, I watched him alone from 6 a.m. to 12 to 2 p.m. while recovering from a C-section, which was incredibly challenging, being on a floor with no kitchen and no shower. I would eat cereal bars all morning to avoid doing the stairs too much in the early days. This and 3, both culminated in me getting, understandably, upset at 2 weeks postpartum, and my husband went 10 rounds instead of handling the situation with kid gloves 2 weeks after I had a baby, or behaving as though he had done something wrong that led to these emotions, like abandoning me in the hospital with a newborn on the hardest day of my life. Despite having 10 weeks paid paternity leave, I did not receive the help or support I needed recovering from surgery or being a new mom. My husband resented the hospital abandonment coming up because it was an accident. 5. I brought up divorcing and my husband begged for more time. We agreed he'd see a therapist again. I have remained individual therapy the whole time. He didn't do it over the course of 6 months and blamed money and time, which didn't fly with me given that I am parenting full-time, working after the baby goes to bed and all weekend. I also provided an interface where therapy links direct to your insurance. I see a $500 therapist for like $10 a week. He now does the same as of this month. I'm getting this feel again about how my resentments are killing this marriage and we could be good if I was more forgiving. I think I forgave shitty behavior, and with a clean slate, He still actively torched our relationship by privileging his needs over mine during my pregnancy and recovery. He does love me, my baby, and my family. He has learned to contribute more as a partner in the last few months. I think the above feels like enough that I will never get over, and I don't think that makes me a bad person. I'm fine to separate at this point. My husband wants to stay together but also wants me to love him again. He censures me for not bouncing back quickly enough from the bat, and not a direct quote, but seems to think our marital distress is me being a drama queen. He is in therapy as of this month. Comment. I'm confused as to what behaviors your husband is exhibiting that are the fault of ADHD. It's not an excuse to be an awe. I have had. It means sometimes I forget to close the cupboards, and I need to make a list and have a timer to complete certain tasks. It doesn't affect how I love my partner and show him my love. Also, stop lighting yourself on fire to keep this guy warm. Don't do things you don't want to. Your husband pushed you to get married when you didn't want to get married. He pushed for a baby name you didn't like. Now he's telling you that this is what a functional relationship looks like and you don't really want to leave. At what point is he going to realize that ignoring what you're saying until you give up on getting him to listen does not actually make the problem go away? Because it sure seems like the answer is never. Which means this isn't going to get better, and you should go ahead and separate before anything else happens that you need to add to the list of things you wish you'd just put your foot down about. Every single word of this comment, and also what the hell kind of therapist blames everything on you when you're the one who seems to have been victimized here by your husband's carelessness and thoughtlessness. I was in therapy for 4 years, and not once would my therapist have ever turned everything around on me like that if I were in your situation. For a therapist to sit there and tell you that it's your resentment that's the problem is utter bullshit. Resentment doesn't go away if the situation never changes and your husband keeps repeatedly doing the same thing over and over again. I'd be willing to bet good money that the therapist was a man who's never been pregnant in his life. I would expect him to have a little bit more empathy as a therapist, something that your husband seems to be lacking. Honestly, if I were you, I would seriously just leave. You've talked about this, you've gone to therapy, and nothing's really changing much. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just, at any one of these examples, I think someone who was in a good place mentally would have run for the hills. So I think it's really terrific that you are working with a professional to process and reframe so you don't repeat these kinds of things. Also, as someone with ADHD, it really pisses me off that your husband/therapist make it out to be an excuse for all of this shit. None of your examples seem indicative of ADHD. Just excuses. Make the exit plan. As someone else with ADHD, I think the difference is how does your husband respond to his condition hurting you? ADHD is a disability, and it can be very, very hard, and it can require patience and understanding on everyone's part. However, that patience and understanding does not negate the need for accountability. When I screw up and forget something or get distracted, and something falls through the cracks, I can acknowledge that it is my disability that is causing that to happen, but I still need to be accountable to the people who are relying on me. I think that's the distinction your husband and his therapist are not willing to make. Yes, all of these things can be side effects of ADHD, and some things may not be realistic goals. However, that does not give anyone with ADHD either right to hurt people all willy-nilly. You are, for sure. But guess what? You don't have to keep being a disaster. You are fully capable of recognizing your mistakes and making a change, today even. So, Google divorce lawyers in your area and do what you need to go GTFO of this hellscape you've subjected yourself to for far too long. You don't really want your kid growing up to think this behavior is okay to emulate or accept, right? Story 2. Almost fiance told me that he's interested in a potential open marriage in the future. Hey y'all, my first time writing one of these, TLDR at the end. Tonight my partner of 4 years and I had a night where we talked about expectations for our engagement. I'm pretty type A and he has ADHD, and when we have something important to talk about we spend a night making a PowerPoint or shared Notion page and chatting. It works for us. Anyway, we talked about what we are both comfortable with for the engagement in regards to budget. Rings I like, rings he likes, the setting, no crowded places, who to tell beforehand, my parents, sister, and 2 best friends, etc. We've been sure we want to marry one another for a while now, but waited to have a proper discussion so we could get excited and get used to the idea first. Plus we aren't in a rush and had other life events to focus on. Anyway, at the end of this loving and productive convo, while the PowerPoint is still up, he looks at me and says, I have something I've been thinking about more lately and I want to ask you, but it's kind of a hard question. My heart immediately drops and I tell him to go on. He goes on to say that his one reservation with marriage is the idea of never being with anyone else again. Like not just intimate, but also never kissing anyone else or touching a new body or anything like that. So then he asked if I think maybe like 10, 15 years down the line if I think I'd ever want to open our relationship for other people. I kept cool. I'm an emotional person, so this is normally the kind of thing that would probably make me cry, but I held them in until I walked away and asked him for more details. Did he mean a threesome or did he mean just having intimate with another woman or even man? No threesome, and just interested in intimate or intimacy with women. Is this something he's asking about for the future or for right now? He emphasized he meant hypothetically in the future. I let him know that I appreciated him being honest and asking, but that it was a hard question for me to answer. Because personally, since my early 20s, I can only have intimate with someone and enjoy it if I feel an emotional connection to them, so I would never want to have intimate with someone else if I was in a fulfilling relationship. So then it would basically just be me approving him to have a hall pass in the future. And I said that I was a bit taken aback and I didn't want to end up in a situation where 10 years from now I'm confronted with either approving my husband to have intimate with other people against my wishes for fear of ending our marriage otherwise, or saying no and being worried that that causes a rift between us or that he's not fully satisfied with me. He said he totally understood and wasn't expecting me to jump for joy about the idea, but he would rather have the talk about it now than when we're actually married. We've maybe had a hypothetical conversations or two about this topic in the past, but they were always pretty casual and way earlier in our relationship. This time felt more serious. He seemed to see that he was making me uncomfortable and apologized for bringing the topic up after we had an enjoyable night, especially since I've been pretty stressed lately with work and apartment hunting as our lease comes to an end. I'm also confused because he doesn't have the highest intimate drive as is, and although he initiates lots of intimacy, I initiate more frequently. He knows my feelings are hurt now and seems apologetic, but I just feel pretty confused. One second we were getting excited about Art Nouveau and Elven-style wedding rings, and the next we were talking about having an open marriage in 10 years. He said it was all hypothetical and he just wanted to know where I stood, but it was just such weird timing after something fun and he got really serious, and he said it's been on his mind recently. The thing is, I am not sure whether to just set boundaries and move on or if this is something I need to take more seriously in assessing our compatibility and deciding a future with him. Also, if anyone had experience with partners asking for open marriages or if they've had their perspective shift after being married for a while, I would appreciate perspective. Comment. Make it clear this is not an option. You only need to consider ending the relationship if he's not cool with monogamy. Open marriage requires both parties to want it. One convincing the other is not enough. If he's really insistent, then you have to really question the relationship. I strongly suggest premarital counseling. Both my nieces did it and are very happily married. It's a really safe space and you will both be asked important questions that you probably haven't thought of. And I'm not ultra sensitive, but that would have absolutely sent me. The timing? I might feel as if he wasn't sure. How could you possibly know how you would feel down the road? If you have kids, that makes it more complicated. There's not a chance I would give a hypothetical future hall pass. If not premarital counseling, then some couples counseling. I would feel pretty devastated. Let's plan our wedding and hey, I really think I'm going to want to kiss and touch someone else at some point. I'm so sorry. There are so many stories on here about threesomes and open relationships ruining marriages/relationships. Maybe you should show him some of the evidence that this is just a terrible idea. T sounds like he wants the perks and stability of being married with the novelty and dopamine hits of dating. This is a two-party consent decision and both parties need to be 100% on board, and it sounds like you aren't. So you need to make it clear you are not okay with that. And you now need a prenup, even if he says he can abide by a closed marriage. Because there is a large chance that he will either pursue someone behind your back or will be upfront with you in the future, but the differing philosophies will end your marriage. Protect yourself. I am so sorry about this. Before you make any serious decisions, I think you need to revisit the topic and really clarify if your fiancé would be okay if you slept with and had intimate relationships with other men in 2 years or in 10. A woman posted a few months ago here with her husband dead set on opening the relationship and asking for it multiple times. She made a Tinder profile one night, woke up the next morning to over 1,000 likes or whatever, and showed her husband. He backed down real quickly. My best advice to you is, 1% of open relationships actually work for people, and doesn't mean your relationship gets any easier, because when it comes down to it, you give an inch, they take a mile and vice versa. It was not hypothetical. But at least he told you the truth, that he will not be loyal to you.